Welcome back to Stronger Minds, Stronger Men, the podcast where we break the silence and dive deep into the world of men's mental health. I'm Austin, and I'm really glad you're here today. Because today we're tackling something that affects every man, whether we realize it or not. It's something that has shaped the way many of us live, think, and interact with the world. And it's something we don't talk about enough. In our last episode, we took a closer look at some of the facts surrounding men's mental health and how past cultural norms, gender expectations, and societal pressures have influenced the way men experience and express their emotions. Today, we're going to take things a step further and ask some deeper questions. Why is it that men, even today, are still conditioned to hide their emotions? Why is vulnerability seen as a weakness instead of a strength? And maybe the most important question of all, what can we do to change that narrative? Not just for ourselves, but for the future generations. Because here's the truth. This isn't just about emotions. It's about freedom. It's about having the freedom to feel, to express, to connect, and to live authentically without shame, without guilt, and without fear of being judged. But to get there, we first have to understand where this conditioning comes from. Because we're not born believing that emotions are bad. We're not born thinking that crying or asking for help or admitting that we're struggling somehow makes us less of a man. Those are messages we picked up along the way from our families, from our peers, and from the media, and even from ourselves. Think about it. How many times have you heard phrases like man up, boys don't cry, or don't be so sensitive? Maybe you heard them when you were a kid, or maybe you even said them to yourself as an adult. These messages are so ingrained in our culture that they can start to feel like the truth. Like there's only one acceptable way to be a man, and that doesn't leave a lot of room for emotions, vulnerability, or asking for help. But here's the thing. Bottling up your emotions doesn't make you stronger. It doesn't make you tougher. What it does is it creates an emotional armor that might protect you in the short term. But over time, that armor starts to weigh you down. It starts to isolate you from the people you love and keep you from living the full, authentic life you deserve. So what do we do about it? How do we start to unmask the armor and create a new, healthier narrative around what it means to be a man? It starts with conversations like this one. It starts with challenging the messages we've been taught and asking ourselves whether they're really serving us or whether it's time to let them go. It starts with giving ourselves and each other permission to feel. Because vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. It's what allows us to connect with people we care about, to build deeper, more meaningful relationships, and to show us our true, authentic selves. And that's what this podcast is all about. So as we dive into today's episode, I want to encourage you to keep an open mind. If something I say resonates with you, take a moment to reflect on it. And if something feels uncomfortable or challenging, lean into it. Because real growth happens outside of our comfort zones. This is just the beginning of a much larger conversation about men's mental health. For centuries, men have been seen as the protectors and providers. That was their role in society. And in many cultures, it was one of the most important responsibilities a man could have. Whether it was defending their families against physical threats, putting food on the table, or being steady as a rock that others could lean on, Men were expected to stay strong, steady, and dependable. And with that role came certain expectations. Strength wasn't just about physical power, it was about emotional toughness too. Men were taught to face adversity with courage, to push through pain, and to keep their emotions in check, no matter what was happening around them. Vulnerability wasn't a part of that equation. In fact, it was seen as dangerous. Why? Because in those days, being vulnerable could be perceived as weakness, and weakness could put you or your family at risk. If you were living in a time when survival depended on strength and resilience, whether you are fighting off wild animals, protecting your land, or defending your home from invaders, you didn't have the luxury of breaking down or letting your guard down. Vulnerability wasn't just frowned upon, it could mean life or death. So men were conditioned over generations to suppress their emotions and tough it out because that's what was necessary for survival. But here's the thing. Even though society has evolved, that cultural conditioning hasn't entirely gone away. We may not be living in the same survival-based environment as our ancestors, but those old ideas about masculinity, strength, and vulnerability are still deeply ingrained in us. Many men still feel that pressure to be the protector, the provider, the rock. They feel like they have to keep their emotions in check because that's what they've been taught their whole lives. Think about it. Think about some of the common messages men hear growing up. Boys don't cry. Man up. Don't be soft. Stop acting like a girl. These phrases might seem harmless on the outside, but they carry a deeper message that showing emotion is something to be ashamed of. That real men don't get sad or scared or anxious. And here's where the problem starts. When you're constantly told to suppress your emotions, you eventually start to believe that your feelings don't matter, or worse, that acknowledging them makes you weak. Over time, that can lead to emotional disconnection, where you become so used to bottling up your feelings that you don't even know how to express them anymore. The result: many men end up carrying an invisible burden. They might be dealing with stress, anxiety, depression, or trauma, but instead of talking about it or seeking help, they keep it all inside. They put on a bright face and act like everything's fine, even when it's not. Because deep down, they've internalized that old belief that being vulnerable is dangerous, that it's a sign of failure or weakness. But here's the reality. Vulnerability isn't weakness. In fact, it takes real strength to open up, to admit that you're struggling, and to ask for help. And that's one of the messages we're trying to emphasize here. Because we're not living in those survival-based societies anymore. We don't have to carry that burden alone. We can break the cycle of silence and redefine what it means to be strong. Strength isn't about bottling things up or pretending you don't have feelings. Real strength is about being honest with yourself and the people that are around you. It's about facing your struggles head on and taking steps to heal. And that's what we're here to talk about today. How we can start shifting the conversation around men's mental health, breaking down the stigma, and creating a culture where it's okay for men to be vulnerable, to ask for help, and to prioritize their mental well-being. Fast forward to modern times, and those expectations of what it means to be a man haven't disappeared. They've just taken on a whole new form. Sure, the world has evolved, and conversations about mental health are starting to happen more openly, but those old beliefs about masculinity still linger beneath the surface. We hear it in everyday phrases that get tossed around without a second thought. Man up, don't cry, and be tough. Now let's pause for a moment and really think what those phrases are telling us. When someone says man up, what they're really saying is don't show weakness. They're saying you're supposed to be strong all the time. You're supposed to push through no matter how much you are struggling, and don't cry. That's basically saying emotions aren't for you. You don't get to feel sad, hurt, or overwhelmed. And here's the thing. These might seem like small, throwaway comments. They might seem harmless. But when boys and men hear those messages over and over and over again, they start to internalize them. It becomes part of their identity. They start to believe that being a man means keeping everything inside, never asking for help, and never showing vulnerability, and that belief is dangerous. Why? Because emotions don't just disappear when you ignore them. When you push your feelings down, they don't magically go away. They just get buried deeper, and over time, that buried pain, that unexpressed anger or sadness starts to show up in other ways. Maybe you get more irritable, snapping at the people you love. Maybe you turn to alcohol, drugs, or unhealthy coping mechanisms to numb the pain. Or maybe you just shut down entirely, withdrawing from the people and activities that used to bring you joy. It's not just about the words themselves. It's about the culture they create. When we tell men directly or indirectly that they shouldn't express their emotions, we're reinforcing a culture of silence. And that culture is a big part of why so many men are struggling in silence today. Think about it. If you've been told your whole life that asking for help is a sign of weakness, it's not going to be easy to then reach out when you are struggling. If you've been taught that showing emotion makes you less of a man, you're going to do everything you can to hide your pain, even when it's tearing you apart inside. And that's exactly what we are seeing. The statistics don't lie. Men are at a higher risk for issues like depressions, addiction, and suicide. And a big part of the reason is this pressure to stay silent, to man up, and handle everything on their own. But here's the truth. No one can carry that weight alone. We need to change the conversation. We need to challenge those old ideas of masculinity and create space for men to be human, to feel, to struggle, to ask for help without fear of judgment. Because real strength isn't about pretending you're fine when you're not. Real strength is about being honest with yourself and the people that are around you. It's about having the courage to say, I'm not okay, and taking steps to get the support you need. So the next time you hear someone say man up or don't cry, think about what that message is really trying to say. And think about how you can respond differently. Maybe instead of telling someone to man up, you ask them how they're really doing. Maybe instead of reinforcing the idea that men shouldn't cry, you let them know it's okay to feel, to be vulnerable, and to be human. Because at the end of the day, that's what all are men are human. And being human means having emotions. It means feeling joy, sadness, anger, and fear, and everything in between. It means struggling sometimes. And that's okay. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. And that is the message we need to start spreading if we want to change the way we think about men's mental health. I remember this one moment like it was yesterday. I was maybe 14 or 15. I don't know what triggered it exactly. Maybe it was just the a long day, or I'd been holding a lot in, but I was standing in an elevator with my dad and my older brother. And out of nowhere, I started thinking about my childhood dog. His name was Lucky. He was a scruffy little mutt with way too much energy for his size. He was the kind of dog that made you feel like everything was okay, even when it wasn't. And in that elevator, for some reason, I imagined what it would be like when he died. Just the thought of losing him hit me hard. My chest got tight, my eyes started to well up, and I turned away, trying to hide it, but I wasn't fast enough. My brother noticed and nudged my dad like, "Yo, are you crying?" And they both laughed, not in a cruel way, but that typical awkward, what do we do with these emotions way that guys sometimes fall into. I remember feeling this wave of shame hit me, like I'd broken some unspoken rule that crying, especially over a dog, especially in front of other guys, wasn't allowed. I didn't say anything, just kept my head down and waited for those elevator doors to open. But looking back now, I wasn't weak in that moment. I was feeling something real. Lucky meant something to me. That grief I imagined, that connection, it came from love. And love isn't weakness. Feeling isn't weakness. That elevator ride taught me a lot, just not in the way I expected. It taught me how early boys start learning to hide their hearts, how quickly we're taught that emotions make us targets, and how deep the message can sit inside of us if we never challenge it. So yeah, I cried in an elevator once, and I'm not ashamed of that anymore. And now, honestly, we all laugh at it now because we have healed and moved past it. So let's talk about how this conditioning shows up in our daily lives, because it's something a lot of men experience, whether we realize it or not. For so many men, this conditioning, this idea that we have to be tough, that we can't show vulnerability, leads to a constant pressure to always have it together. It's like there's this unspoken rule. You can't let anyone see you struggle. You can't let your guard down, even for a moment, because that might make you look weak. And this pressure starts early. Maybe it was something you heard growing up, things like man up or boys don't cry. Maybe it was the way the men in your life acted. You never saw them talk about their feelings, so you learn to do the same. And over time, that message gets ingrained. It becomes part of how you see yourself. You start to believe that being strong means staying silent. That being a man means handling everything on your own, no matter how hard it gets. So what happens? You put on a mask, you act like everything's fine, even when it's not. Maybe you're struggling at work or in your relationship or with your mental health, but you keep it to yourself because you don't want to burden anyone else. You tell yourself, I got this. I don't need help. And maybe on the outside, it looks like you've got it all together. But on the inside, you're barely holding on. This conditioning can also show up in the way we deal with stress. Instead of talking about it, what's bothering us, we try to numb it. Maybe that means drinking a little more than usual. Maybe it means throwing ourselves into work so we don't have to think about it, what's really going on. Or maybe it means withdrawing, shutting down emotionally, and putting away and pulling away from the people who care about us. And here's the real tricky part. A lot of this happens on autopilot. We've been taught for so long to hide our emotions, to tough it out, that we don't even realize we're doing it. We just think this is what it means to be a man. But the truth is, that kind of thinking isn't helping us, it's hurting us. And it's not just hurting us, it's hurting the people around us too. So if any of this sounds familiar, I want you to know that you're not alone. A lot of men are dealing with the same thing. And the good news is, we don't have to stay stuck in that cycle. We can learn a different way. We can break the conditioning that's been holding us back. And it starts with having conversations like this, being real about what we're going through and supporting each other along the way. Let's take a deeper look at how suppressing emotions shows up in relationships, because this is something a lot of men experience without fully realizing it. If you've been taught your whole life to suppress your emotions, it's incredibly hard to suddenly flip that switch and open to your partner, your kids, or even your closest friends. That emotional wall you've built up over the years doesn't just protect you from feeling pain, it also becomes a barrier to real connection. Think about it. If you've spent years pushing down your feelings, you might not even realize that you're built this wall around yourself. But the people who care about you, they can feel it. They might not be able to put it into words, but they can sense that something is off, that you're not fully present, and that can create a lot of confusion and hurt in your relationships. Let's say your partner is trying to have a serious conversation with you about something that's been bothering them. Maybe they're feeling disconnected and they want to understand what's going on with you. But because you've been taught to keep your emotions locked up tight, you don't know how to respond. You might shrug it off, change the subject, or give a quick, I'm fine, don't worry about it. And in your mind, you might think you're protecting them by not burdening them with your struggles. But what they're hearing is, I don't trust you enough to let you in. Over time, that can create a lot of distance. Your partner might start to feel like they're walking on eggshells around you, unsure of how to reach you. They might even start to pull away themselves, not because they don't care, but because they feel shut out. And that's the tragedy of it. The very thing you're doing to protect your loved ones, keeping your emotions bottled up, is actually pushing them away. It's the same with your kids. Kids are incredibly intuitive. They pick up on emotional energy even if they don't fully understand it. So if you're carrying a lot of unprocessed stress, anger, or sadness, they're going to sense that. And if they see you withdrawing or shutting down emotionally, they might just start to mirror that behavior. They might learn that it's not okay to talk about their feelings because they've never been seen it with you. That's how these emotional patterns get passed down from generation to generation. And if we don't break the cycle, we end up teaching our kids the same thing we were taught, that real men don't cry, that emotions are a sign of weakness, and that the best way to deal with pain is to bury it deep inside. But here's the truth. Breaking that cycle starts with you. It starts with recognizing that the emotional wall you've built to protect yourself is also keeping you from experiencing the deep, meaningful connections that make life worth living. It starts with small steps. Maybe it's opening up to your partner about something that's been weighing on you, or sitting down with your kids and talking about how you're feeling. It's not about suddenly becoming an open book overnight. It's about making the choice to just a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more honest, and a little bit more present. Because when you do that, you're not just improving your own mental health, you're also creating a ripple effect in your relationship. You're showing the people you love that it's okay to have emotions, that it's okay to talk about what's really going on, and that being strong doesn't mean being silent. And that's how real change happens. One conversation at a time, one small step toward connection, one act of courage that breaks down the emotional wall, brick by brick. Now let's talk about the workplace for a minute because this is a big one. A lot of men feel like they have to hide their emotions at work just to be taken seriously. It's almost like there's this unspoken rule that if you show up any kind of stress or vulnerability, you're going to be seen as weak, unprofessional, or not up to the job. And that's not just the high stakes professions like law enforcement, the military, or firefighting, it's across the board. Whether you're working in an office, on a construction site, or in any other environment, there's often this pressure to just man up and push through. The problem is when you're constantly pretending that everything's fine, even when it's not, it takes a toll. Maybe you're struggling to stay focused because your mind is racing, or maybe you're snapping at coworkers because you're carrying all this stress inside and it has to come out somewhere. Over time, that kind of emotional suppression can start to affect your performance, your relationship with colleagues, and your overall job satisfaction. You might find yourself dreading going to work and feeling completely burnt out, but you don't feel like you can say anything because you're afraid of how it will be perceived. And here's the thing, this pressure to hide what you're going through doesn't just hurt you, it hurts the entire workplace. When people feel like they can't be honest about their mental health, it creates a toxic environment where burnout, disengagement, and high turnover becomes this norm. On the flip side, when workplaces encourage open conversations about mental health and provide resources like employee assistance programs, counseling, or peer support, it benefits everybody. Productivity improves, relationships strengthen, and people feel more connected and supported. So if you're in a leadership role, think about the kind of culture you're creating. Are you fostering an environment where people feel safe to talk about their struggles? And if you're not in a leadership role, remember that change can start with you. Even something as simple as checking in on a coworker who seems off or sharing your own experience can make a difference. We all have a role to play in breaking down the stigma around men's mental health in the workplace. And it starts with being willing to have that conversations. You know, think about this. Some of the things we can talk about are things like crying in the workplace, the pressure to always be the fixer or the problem solver, and how emotional suppression can lead to anger, frustration, or even violence when emotions finally boil over. Prime example, I know in my career, I have to be a problem solver. Like, I am here to solve people's problems. I am here to literally solve an issue. But how am I supposed to do that when I can't even solve my own? And there's that pressure that I have to solve my own to be able to fix it. But if I hide it all the time, if I don't solve those problems, I cannot show up to my job and do it properly. How emotional suppression can lead to anger? I mean, you see it all the time. The guy who is a cashier and just gets yelled at, and they start taking that anger out on you. I know I've heard about it in law enforcement where sometimes a guy or a girl, for that matter, will be having a bad day. And I know it's talked about a lot where it's like, hey, if you're having a bad day, talk to somebody. But maybe in that moment, they're having a bad day, or maybe they just got off the phone call with their partner or whatever and had a fight. And now they pull you over, and all of a sudden, you're the target of their aggression. And I'm not saying every cop's like that. I'm not saying any cop is like that. What I'm saying is that humans tend to be like that. They find an outlet, and that outlet is usually the wrong person. It's in the wrong way. It's in an unhealthy, unbeneficial way. Now, when we suppress our emotions, they don't just disappear. It might feel like we've managed to push them down, like we buried them deep enough that they don't or won't resurface, but that's not how emotions work. Suppressing emotions is more like shoving a beach ball under the water. You might be able to hold it down for a while, but eventually it's going to pop back up. And when it does, it probably hit you in the face. When we ignore our emotions, they build up over time. Each time we suppress sadness, anger, fear, or sadness, it adds to this invisible pile that we're carrying around. And eventually that pile becomes too big to manage. Eventually those emotions are going to come out one way or another. The problem is when they've been bottled up for so long, they often come out in ways we don't expect or in ways that hurt us and the people around us. Sometimes that buildup leads to a breakdown. You might hit a point where you just can't hold it together anymore. You might break down in tears, having an anxiety attack, or feeling completely overwhelmed by everything you've been carrying inside. And that can be a scary experience, especially if you don't understand why it's happening. Other times, those suppressed emotions come out through anger. This is especially common for men because in our society, anger is often the only acceptable emotion for a man to express. We're taught from a young age that it's okay to be tough, it's okay to be mad, but it's not okay to cry, to be scared, or to admit that we're struggling. So, what happens when we've been suppressing all these emotions and all those other emotions like sadness, hurt, or fear? Well, they eventually come out as anger. Maybe you start snapping at your kids or your partner. Maybe you find yourself getting road rage or losing your temper over a little things that would normally never bother you. Or maybe it's a bigger outburst, a shouting match, or a physical altercation that leaves you wondering, where did that come from? Well, it came up from all those emotions you've been bottling up. And here's the kicker: suppressed emotions don't just affect your mental health, they can affect your physical health too. There's a strong connection between your mind and your body. And when you're carrying around all that emotional stress, it takes a toll on your body. You might start experiencing headaches, stomach problems, chronic pain. You might notice that your muscles are always tense or that you're grinding your teeth at night. Over time, that stress can lead to more serious health problems like high blood pressure, heart disease, or a weakened immune system. This isn't just a speculation, it's backed by science. Studies have shown that people who suppress their emotions are at a higher risk for a range of health problems, both physical and mental. And the longer you suppress those emotions, the greater the risk becomes. So, what's the takeaway here? It's that suppressing your emotions might seem like a short term solution, but it's not a solution at all. It's like putting a band aid on a wound that needs stitches. You're not really fixing the problem, you're just covering it up, and that eventually that wound is going to get worse. The healthier option, the braver option, is to face those emotions head on, to let yourself feel them, process them, and work through them. That doesn't mean you have to do it alone. Sometimes working through your emotions means talking to a friend, a family member, or a therapist. It means giving yourself permission to feel instead of constantly trying to push those feelings down. Because here's the truth: when you face your emotions, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping the people around you too. You're breaking the cycle of suppression and the silence that so many have been caught in for generations. And that's how real healing begins. This is one of the key reasons why men are more likely to struggle with substance abuse and tragically more likely to die by suicide. The statistics don't lie. When you're carrying that emotional weight all by yourself, day after day, year after year, it can feel completely overwhelming. It's like carrying an invisible load that gets heavier with time. You might start to think that the only way to cope is to numb the pain. For a lot of men, that's where substance abuse comes in. Maybe it starts small, a few extra drinks after work, take the edge off, or using something stronger to escape reality for a little while. But that's a slippery slope because while substances might dull the pain temporarily, they don't actually take the pain away. They just bury it deeper. And the longer you rely on those coping mechanisms, the harder it becomes to dig your way back out. And then the silence. When you're struggling and you feel like you can't talk to anyone about it, the isolation can be devastating. You might start to believe that no one understands what you're going through, or worse, that no one cares. That's when things can spiral, when the pain of the silence and the isolation combine. It can lead to thoughts of hopelessness or feeling like the world would be better off without you. Here's the thing. It doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to carry the weight alone. There are people who want to help, and the healthier ways to deal with the pain, it starts by breaking that silence, by opening up and talking about what you're going through. And I know that's not easy, but it's the first step towards healing, and that's what this conversation is all about. So how do we break free from this cycle? Well, it starts with awareness. Awareness is the first step to any kind of meaningful change, because we can't change what we don't see. And for a lot of men, the beliefs and behaviors that are holding them back are so deeply ingrained, they don't even realize that they are there. We've been conditioned by family, by culture, by media, and even by each other to believe certain things about what it means to be a man. Things like don't cry, man up, tough it out, handle it on your own. But here's the thing. Most of us never stop to question those messages. We just accept them as truth because that's what we've been taught. But are those beliefs actually helping us, or are they keeping us stuck? That's where awareness comes in. It's about taking a step back and questioning ourselves. Where did I learn this? And is this belief serving me, or is it hurting me? For example, if you've been taught your whole life that showing emotion is a weakness, then anytime you feel sadness, fear, or anxiety, your instinct might be to shove it down and pretend it's not there. But that doesn't make those emotions disappear. It just bruises them. And eventually, they come out in other ways. Anger, withdrawal, substance use, or even physical health issues. Awareness is about noticing those patterns and having the courage to question them. It's about saying, you know what? I've been carrying this belief for a long time, but maybe it's not actually true. Maybe I don't have to keep living this way. And that's not easy to do. It takes honesty, it takes self-reflection, it takes getting uncomfortable. But it also takes incredibly freeing when you do it. Because once you've been and become aware of the old messages and start to challenge them, you open yourself up to the possibility of something different, something healthier. You start to rewrite the story you've been living by. You've been saying and begin to say, I don't have to be silent about what I'm feeling. I don't have to carry this weight alone. I don't have to prove my worth by suffering in silence. That's how we begin to break the cycle. It's not about blaming the people who taught us these things. They were often just doing the best they could with what they knew. But now we have the opportunity to do better, to be more conscious, more intentional, and more compassionate with ourselves and with the men around us. So if you're listening to this and you are starting to see some of those patterns in your own life, that's a good thing. That means you're becoming aware. That's where real change begins. It doesn't have to be dramatic or overnight. It starts with little tiny shifts. Paying attention, asking questions, being willing to see things differently. And from there, we can start to build a new kind of strength, one that isn't based on silence or stoicism, but on honesty, vulnerability, and connection. That's the kind of strength that actually changes lives. So, again, how do we break free from the cycle? It starts with awareness, and awareness opens the door to healing. The next step is to start participating vulnerability and practicing it. Now I know for a lot of men, even just hearing the word vulnerability can make us tense up a little. We think it means weakness, or maybe you've been taught that it's dangerous, something to avoid at all costs. That if we let our guard down, we'll get hurt or judged or seen as less of a man. But that's not what vulnerability really is. Vulnerability isn't about spilling and spilling your guts to strangers or crying in public, if that's not who you are. It's not about being soft or overly emotional. It's simply about being honest with yourself and with the people you trust about what's really going on inside. It means acknowledging when you're struggling instead of pretending everything's fine. It means saying, I'm not okay right now. Instead of isolating yourself, it means being real. And I'll be honest, this part isn't easy either, especially when we've been spent years or decades learning how to put up our walls. We've been taught to wear masks, to stay strong, to be the provider, the protector, the one who always has it tougher and together. But all that pressure, it builds, it piles up, and eventually it becomes too much. Practicing vulnerability is about giving yourself permission to put some of that weight down. It's saying, I'm allowed to feel, I'm allowed to hurt, I'm allowed to be human. And again, it doesn't mean you have to open up to everyone. In fact, that's not healthy either. What it means is finding safe space and safe people where you can be real. Maybe that's a therapist, maybe it's a close friend, maybe it's a men's group, or maybe it's just you being honest with yourself in a journal for the first time in years. Small steps matter. Saying something as simple as, today was hard, or I'm feeling anxious and I don't really know why. That's vulnerability. That is bravery. Because let's be real, anyone can pretend to be tough. Anyone can fake strength, but it takes real courage to be honest. It takes strength to say, this is what's really going on for me right now. That's not weakness, that's power. And more importantly, that's where connections start. Because when we're vulnerable, we give other people permission to be real too. And when we're pretending we feel alone, but when we start to open up, even just a little, we realize we're not the only ones. We're not broken. We're not weird. We're just human like everybody else. So if you're ready to break that cycle, if you're ready to start healing, this is the next step. Practice vulnerability. Start small. Be honest. Give yourself permission to feel even the uncomfortable stuff, especially the uncomfortable stuff, because that's where healing happens, where connections is built, and that's where real change begins. One of the simplest but most powerful tools I found for managing my emotions is journaling. I know it might sound a little out there or even soft if you've never done it before, but hear me out. There was a time when I was going through a lot. I didn't really have anyone I felt comfortable talking to. I was angry, frustrated, confused, but I didn't even know why. Everything felt bottled up, so one night I grabbed my phone and started typing. No filter, no plan. These are just raw thoughts. What came out surprised me. I wrote things I hadn't even admitted to myself. Fears I'd been pushing down, regrets I didn't know I was holding on to. I realized I wasn't just angry, I was scared. I wasn't just tired, I was overwhelmed. That journal became a mirror I didn't know I needed. And here's the thing, nothing changed overnight, but over time, journaling gave me a space to breathe emotionally. It helped me recognize patterns in my thoughts, track my progress, and understand myself better. It became like a pressure valve for everything I was holding in. Some of the other options are having open conversations with friends, partners, or therapists, practicing mindfulness to get in touch with your feelings, and we'll have a conversation about that later. Reframing vulnerability as a sign of strength, not weakness. These are all things that you could do to practice your own mental well being, being vulnerable, and allowing yourself to feel human. You don't have to carry your emotions alone. And just know that. For far too long, so many of us have been taught to hold it all in, to keep things bottled up, to believe that we're supposed to figure it out on our own, no matter how heavy it gets. But the truth is, we're not built to do life alone. We're wired for connection, for community, for support. It's okay to feel, whether you're carrying anger, sadness, fear, confusion. It's valid. You don't have to shove it down or pretend it's not there. Emotions aren't weakness, they're signals, they're messengers. And if we ignore them long enough, they don't go away. They just show up in different and in other ways. Stress burnout, outbursts, numbness. So give yourself permission to actually feel what's going on, even if it's messy, even if it's uncomfortable. That's where healing starts. It's okay to ask for help. I can't stress this enough. Reaching out is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of strength, whether it's talking to a friend, a family member, or a therapist. Even joining a men's group, asking for help means you've recognized your value. It means you're choosing to show up for yourself. And it's okay to be vulnerable. You don't have to rip the Band-Aid off all at once. Vulnerability isn't about dumping everything out. It's about being real in small intentional ways. It's about saying, hey, I'm not okay, or I'm having a tough day, and letting that be enough. So start small. Have a conversation with someone you trust. Write down how you're feeling, even if it's just for you to see. You don't have to figure out everything out right now. You just have to take one honest step. And remember, you are stronger than you think, not because you're invincible, but because you're going and keep going. You keep showing up. You're doing the work even when it's hard. That's strength. That's courage. That's what being a man really looks like. So before we close out today's episode, I want to leave you with a little challenge. Taking a moment, maybe after this ends, maybe later tonight, and really reflect on your own emotional conditioning. Ask yourself, what messages did I receive growing up about emotions? Who taught me what it meant to be strong? When was the last time I felt something deeply and actually let myself feel it? You don't have to answer all these right now, but awareness starts with asking questions. And the more you explore your own emotional story, the more power you have to shape a new one. And honestly, I would love to hear from you. If something in today's episode resonates with you, if it challenged you, reminded you of something, or just made you pause, share it. Post about it on social media. You can email me directly, and if you're comfortable, I'd be honored to hear your story. This space isn't just about my voice, it's about all of ours. And you never know who might need to hear what you have to say. In our next episode, we'll be taking a deeper look at something many of us have been told our entire lives. Just tough it out. We'll explore how that mindset, while often well intentioned, can actually be harmful to our mental, emotional, and even physical health. What does it really cost to keep pushing through without asking for help? And how do we begin to challenge that belief in a way that builds true strength? Trust me, you don't want to miss it. All right, well, that's it for today. Thanks for spending a little time with me, for showing up for yourself, and for being open to the conversation. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.